Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel. Could electrical failure lead to a takeover of the United States? Could there be some kind of electrical end of the United States? What triggered this is I saw an article in March of 2017, and it was titled, "Totally Insane Things That Will Happen If Our Power Grid Goes Down." I'd like to share some things from the article, some things from some other articles, as well as some things I've written about this in the past, because I don't believe I've ever tried to cover this in a message like this on a video. And what are the potential biblical ramifications of such a thing? Could it possibly happen? And if so, what would happen? What could happen if it happened? So here's from this article called "Totally Insane Things That Will Happen If Our Power Grid Goes Down." It said, if our society suffered widespread power failure that lasted for weeks or months, it would be no different than if we were suddenly back in the 1800s. Well, there'd be a major difference, because back in the 1800s, the population was less, things were spread out more, people were used to living off the land, etc. But not so much these days. It would be a strange and dangerous world for the average person, that's for sure. And the article says it would catch them off guard in the following ways. So we're going to go through the 6 ways and some other comments. According to this article, quote, all commerce would cease. Now, there'd still be some kind of bartering or some kind of commerce, but this is what it says. The ATMs wouldn't work. Okay, that's true. The banks won't open. Well, maybe eventually. The cash registers won't register. For a while, cash will be king. But as the crisis goes on for more than a few weeks, then people will view it as worthless. We'll be back to a barter economy in short order. And that's what I was saying. The economy, all commerce will not cease because barter would still be going on, as well as people stealing through brute force and whatever else. So that was one of the insane things. Second item, communication will shut down. You look these days, it seems like just about everybody's got a cell phone. I'm like, I guess I'm considered a Luddite because I don't have one. But people communicating through telephones, through the internet, electronically. These particular videos take electricity to watch. It says, if you think you can rely on your cell phone to work in a disaster, think again. In a crisis, when everybody instinctively reaches for their phone, that limit is quickly surpassed, and the radios on the tower get sluggish, thus causing fast busy signal and other issues. So there will be a major communication problem. Number 3. Without electricity, all forms of fuel that our society relies on will stop flowing. All of our vehicles will be dead in the water, and more importantly, the trucks will stop delivering food. And it's true that those who live out by woods or something could at least get trees and burn those to warm themselves up if it was cold. Beyond that, there would be problems because of fuel. Now, I don't believe it's possible that we would lose all fuel. The United States has some stored fuel, and there would be some ways that we would do some certain things. But imagine if there was no power, suddenly none. Things would be really, really bad for societies who are used to power. And number 4. And of course, many of those farms will lack water, as will your plumbing. Just for a couple of days after the power grid goes out, you'll still have running water, since water towers rely on gravity to feed the water to your home. And that's true. And in our case, we actually lost power a couple of weeks ago, and I think the month before also. And our water had a shared well, and it's some kind of a water tank, and so for a while we would have water. However, electricity is required to clean that water. Well, ours would have to get clean, but pump it into the tower, and that's true. Our water has to be pumped through electricity. Once it's out, it means you won't be able to flush your toilet, and that would cause other issues. But the fact that people need water. This 5th thing was, when the grocery stores are stripped bare, the pharmacies won't be far behind. So the warning is run out of food. And this article talks about the percentage of Americans who are dependent upon medications, and without these medications they're not going to function, and this is going to cause other problems, and some people will die for lack of medications. I tend to be an anti-medical person, so I personally wouldn't be particularly affected that way because I don't take any, but a lot of people do take them. Some might be better off if they did run out of them, but some people might face some severe withdrawals and other problems if they didn't have them. Number 6. And finally, one of the most shocking things that people will have to deal with is lack of GPS. The GPS satellites will probably keep running, but eventually the devices that read those signals will not. These days people are pretty reliant on GPS for directions. There aren't that many paper maps lying around. Well, I still actually have a few paper maps. The average person is going to be utterly lost if the grid goes down. And a lot of people will be lost. It's tricky to go from being used to electricity to not having it. Then this article concludes with, or this part concludes, in summary, law and order will break down at every level and death will be around every corner. And that's sadly the case. We've seen in the United States, for example, when power goes out in big cities, there are riots and looting and that type of thing. Out where we're at, power goes out often enough that we see it frequently. As I told you, we've had without power at least twice in the last month or so. And the last time was about 20 hours, 18, 20 hours without power. But when we were out power 18, 20 hours, there were people that I knew who did not have it for 3 or 4 days. But in this area, we don't tend to have riots and looting, but in a lot of big cities, criminals take advantage of the lack of power, realizing the police can't deal with everything, can't be everywhere, etc. And so we would see a law and order breakdown. Now, our power grid is vulnerable to a couple different types of things. One is solar flares, which I'll get to later, and the other is electromagnetic pulse bomb, which nations such as North Korea and Iran are believed to currently have, and both of those nations have threatened to bomb the United States one way or the other, directly or indirectly, and the United States could be vulnerable to such a thing. Now, some have claimed if an EMP goes off the right spot in the United States, it pretty much bring us to the Stone Age, and that could perhaps be the case, although there has been some work done to prevent this type of disaster, or to reduce, some of the damage to this disaster. On the other hand, I read an article in January that the Obama administration was blamed for not doing enough for this. I know a group of scientists in 2016 sent then President Barack Obama a letter saying why he needed to do something, and others are saying he didn't do enough. Whether the Trump administration will do much on that or not, I don't know. I do believe I've read that the military has done a few things to help protect the military, which doesn't necessarily mean regular society would go on very well. Here's something else about this. It says the results in an EMP incident would be catastrophic. The U.S. power grid would be destroyed. Planes would crash. Water and sewage systems would fail. Banks could not access their records. Transportation systems would be inoperable. The internet would go down. Emergency services would be severely hampered. And interestingly, about transportation systems being inoperable, nowadays, for example, if we ship something by way of UPS or FedEx, their systems are internet related, computer related. They may be able to do some of their things by hand, but it would take longer. But again, if there's no power, they're not going to be running very long anyway. Both U.S. and Soviet scientists became aware of this threat back in 1962 at the latest, and they said they'd seen a nuclear test 800 miles away from Hawaii. It knocked out 300 of the state's street lights, triggered alarms, and causes damages to the phone company. And Russia had done something, and it caused some problems for them as well. I mentioned solar flares. I'd like to read something from NASA. Now, I actually reported this back in 2009. It said, solar storm warning. Researchers announced that a storm is coming. The most intense maximum in 50 years. Prediction comes from a team of the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Solar physicist David Hathaway of the National Space and Science and Technology Center has confidence in some belt model that says we could have a solar maximum, which is a doozy. He says a storm is going to come. Solar outbursts have been proposed to basically wipe out civilization. And there was something speculative that came out from the National Academy of Sciences on this. It says Skies above Manhattan are filled with flickering curtain of colorful lights. Within 90 seconds, the entire eastern half of the U.S. is without power. A year later, millions of Americans are dead and the nation's infrastructure lies in tatters. The World Bank declares America a developing nation. Europe, Scandinavia, and Japan are also struggling to recover from the same fateful event. A violent storm, 150 million kilometers away on the surface of the sun. According to the NAS report, a severe space weather event in the U.S. would induce ground currents that would knock out 300 key transformers within about 90 seconds, cutting off power to more than 130 million people. First to go, immediately, for some people, would be drinking water. Then there's no electricity for things like trains, underground or above ground. For hospitals, it would mean running about 72 hours on their backup systems. And as this goes on for months or years, we could have severe problems. And again, this could happen from a so-called natural phenomena, such as some kind of solar flare disturbance from the sun, and or it could be caused or encouraged by the successful release of an electromagnetic pulse bomb. A few years ago, I read that the United States did some kind of testing for one of these bombs, and supposedly it does work. And the United States isn't the only power that's believed to have these things. So the U.S., because of its dependency upon electricity, faces a massive threat from many things that could knock out the power grid. Now I'd like to go to the book of Mark chapter 13. Jesus taught about a time of sorrows and troubles. So let me read starting verse 7, Mark 13. But when you hear of wars and rumors of war, do not be troubled, for such things must happen, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows. Well, most of the United States act like it's going to go on indefinitely and can't truly be brought down. Electrical issues, weather issues, pestilences, and other issues can possibly may hit the United States. The United States is going to experience more problems with terrorism, weather issues, debt, and crop failures. The fact that the United States is so dependent on genetically modified organisms for their, say, soy and corn, they're looking at wheat, and many vegetables, the United States is putting itself in a position where it could be affected by famine. He said, but wait a second, I thought you were talking about electricity. Well, electricity could affect that as well. If the United States has a severe power or outage, it could weaken the United States. Now, consider that in the end times, the Bible talks about someone called the King of the North. You can read about him in Daniel 11, verses 29 to 45. The Bible talks about King of the South. You can read about him in Daniel, say, 11, 40 to 43. And in Revelation 16, 12 through 16, we hear about the kings of the East. Well, the United States is in the West. There is no king of the West mentioned in the end times, at least according to Protestant scholars. Protestant scholars who believe in Protestant prophetic scholars look at the Bible and say, they don't see a power they think resembles the United States at the end, and it must be gone. Well, there is a power resembling the United States in the first part of the end, but then it is gone. And is it possible that between famines, debt, and perhaps electrical power loss, the United States will be weakened to the point somebody might try to take it over? Well, the United States is going to be taken over. If you go to Daniel chapter 11, verse 39, we read about a leader called the King of the North. Let me read this verse. Thus he, the King of the North, shall act against the strongest fortresses of the foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. Well, in the 21st century, the strongest fortresses belong to the United States. Now, people don't believe the United States can be taken over. The United States intends to spend more money on its military, and people will think it's impenetrable. But what if it's got problems? Crop failures, as I mentioned, debt. The United States has more debt than any country on earth. The Bible warns that highly indebted power will be taken over. You can read that in Habakkuk 2, verses 6 through 8. But something like electrical loss through solar activity and or EMP bombs, etc., puts the United States in a very weakened position, so it can be taken over. Again, in the 21st century, it's the United States that has the strongest fortresses. So this prophecy about the Kingdom of the North taking over somebody and dividing its land for gain, presuming this is a 21st century prophecy, and I believe that it is, this is a reference to the United States. And somehow the United States has got to be weak enough this could happen. Now, I believe deceit will also be used. The European power that will take over the United States will pretend to be our friend. Yet, in the book of Lamentations, chapter 1, verses 1 through 2, it talks about that friends will become enemies, and power will be betrayed by its friends. Now, another verse I'd like to go to is in the book of Daniel, but this time, Daniel chapter 8. I'd like to read in verse 25. Through his cunning, and this is the king of the north again, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. He shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. Now, because it says he will destroy many in their prosperity, I do not believe that the entire United States is going to be devastated by some type of electrical devastation. But I do believe some electrical problem could hit the United States, and it could be a factor that will weaken the United States. Now, when the King of the North successfully takes over the United States, according to Revelation 13, verses 3 through 4, the world's going to marvel. They're going to marvel because they think it could happen. And it's likely that the United States is going to have to be in a weakened state before this can happen. Now, the Bible does not specify electricity as a factor in the destruction of the U.S., but it does say that destruction is coming to the power of the greatest fortresses, the strongest fortresses. And since after Daniel 11:39, we don't see anything that resembles a end-time king of the West, you ought to ask yourself, how could it be? And it is possible that electrical problems combined with debt, deceit, wars, rumors of wars, famines, and pestilences, of a combination of events will weaken the United States to the point where power will take it over. The end will come to the United States, and electricity, or lack thereof, could possibly play a role in that. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible and His Prophecy channel.